For the last century, we lived in a world where America was the country of tomorrow.
America remains what Emerson called her 150 years ago, the country of tomorrow.
A unipolar world that has lasted 30 years, where the U.S. has been the exceptional country.
I believe in American exceptionalism with every fiber of my being.
And that exceptionality allowed the U.S. to intervene around the world to spread its values.
My fellow citizens, at this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq.
But now, new and old threats to the U.S. hegemony have risen and are taking on the U.S. exceptionalism.
If you think about the situation we face today, we have the possibility of a great power war in East Asia between the United States and China. And we have the possibility of a great power war in Eastern Europe between the United States and Russia. We, in effect, have two Cold Wars. And I would argue that in the case of the U.S.-China competition, that Cold War, the one that we now see in East Asia, is more dangerous than the Cold War that existed in Europe during the period from 1947 to 1989.
And it's not just outside of the U.S. where exceptionalism and intervention are in doubt.
Does American exceptionalism still exist? And what do we do to grow American exceptionalism?
Okay, well, I don't like the term.
But the particularly alarming thing is what the data shows us about the transition of power between hegemonic countries, in this case between the US and China. 12 out of 16 times in history, these transitions have ended up in a major war. Wars between rising and current hegemons are so frequent that historians have given that phenomenon a name. I will introduce you to the Thucydides Trap and show you how it can lead the US, China, and the entire world to a disaster. Almost 2,500 years ago, two ancient powers suddenly found themselves at war. Athens and Sparta, former allies against the Persian Empire, fought for hegemony over the Greek world. The war would last for 27 years and shake the foundations of what was, at the time, international order. Sparta, despite being victorious, was left in such a weakened state that it allowed for new players such as Thebes and Macedon to emerge and challenge its position as the hegemon. But what caused the war between former allies? Thucydides says it was the rise of Athens and the fear that it caused Sparta. Now, once again, as many times in history, we find ourselves in a similar situation. America's unipolar moment is over, its power is diminishing and being challenged by aspiring nations all over the world. But the greatest challenge comes from Asia, where Communist China is rapidly expanding its economic and military potential. China's economy has become the second largest in the world, and its companies compete with American counterparts for markets and resources. The People's Liberation Army has become the pacing threat to American military operations in Asia, and China's diplomatic influence rivals that of the United States in many parts of the world. But before China can become a great superpower, it will have to firstly become a regional hegemon. In a region littered with U.S. allies and military bases, that will be no easy task. We are on the verge of a new war that could completely destroy the world as we know it. And the thing is, almost nobody is taking it seriously. People are unable to comprehend how the US-China competition could ignite the Third World War. But the perception that the war is unlikely won't stop the invisible forces that are guiding the US and China towards conflict. After all, in 1914, few could imagine the slaughter on a scale that demanded a new category, World War. When Neville Chamberlain famously said, "Peace for our time," who could have imagined that the events of Holocaust would unfold over the next 6 years? For those reasons, the defining question about global order for this generation is whether China and the United States can escape Thucydides' trap